G'day and welcome back to what I think is going to be quite a special episode of Reality Check. Today I have my friend and colleague Dr. Beatriz Villarroel, who is a researcher in astronomy at the Nordic Institute for Theoretical Physics, Nordita in Stockholm. She leads the VASCO project, an acronym for Vanishing and Appearing Sources during a century of observations, and she also leads the ExoProbe project, a research project that looks for ET probes within our solar system. And it uses multiple telescopes to look for short light flashes that might indicate the presence of artificial non-human objects. So-called technosignatures are something that human scientists have looked for decades. We've looked for things called Dyson spheres way out there in the universe, any signs of constructed technology. There hasn't been any solid scientific evidence to date of anything closer in. But the significance of what Dr. Villarroel's about to talk to us about today is huge. It cannot be overstated. It's a possibility only at this stage, but what she's raising is momentous if it turns out to be confirmed through the peer review that is still currently ongoing. The key to Dr. Villarroel's potentially latest enormously significant discovery is the fact that before we humans started launching the first satellites in 1957, our sky was free from the thousands of satellites and millions of pieces of debris, space junk at geosynchronous orbits that clutter the skies. It's hugely frustrating for today's astronomers that these tiny little bits of space junk give off fast flashes of light that contaminate our view of the universe. So what Beatriz and her colleagues around the world have been doing is scouring old photographic astronomical glass plates for signatures of satellites and space junk. Humans had nothing up there in orbit before 1957, and the photographs taken in the early 1950s by the first Mount Palomar Sky Survey, the Samuel Oschin telescope at Mount Palomar in California, have been digitized, allowing digital searches to be done inside those plates for what are called transients. Now, bear with me here. I know we're taking a long while to set up Beatriz, but it's very important you understand some of the history before we get into the significance of what she's talking about. Beatriz joined us on Reality Check about a year ago to talk about her preliminary discovery of transients, objects that were definitely in orbit in the 1950s, but have since disappeared. In April 1950, 9 separate light sources appeared on those plates, not there previously, and then they vanished without any explanation. Some of these anomalous objects showed up at the same time as one of the most momentous UFO UAP sighting events in world history, the Washington, D.C. flyover, the historic 1952 UFO flyover where multiple alleged craft were seen and recorded on radar by multiple witnesses, including military pilots. It raised the intriguing possibility that what was detected by Beatriz's team was something technological, something artificial, perhaps even non-human, alien. Now, in a new paper entitled, attractively, Aligned Multiple Transient Events in the First Palomar Sky Survey. You could make it sound more sexy and exciting, Beatriz. Beatriz and her team have analysed nearly 300,000 transient events from pre-satellite sky surveys. Beatriz, what does it all mean? Welcome to Reality Check. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
It's super fun to be here. Thank you a lot for inviting me. It's a great honor, and I'm super excited to talk about the results as well, even if I'm super scared to do it, but I still think it's important that I present what we have seen and what we have found.
What have you found?
we have found something super interesting. And so actually it's a number of findings that have been done in the last year, thanks to that I work with really like good people who have joined the team. And for example, like I've been working with these transients, and I've always been thinking like looking at certain cases where we've been seeing multiple transients appearing and vanishing, and I've been ignoring that there are hundreds, thousands of them, which I started learning that I should not have ignored those hundreds of thousands, because, for example, we have a paper now together. So it's first author is Stephen Brule at Vanderbilt University, and he has used 100,000 of these transients. They are not visually vetted, and he has checked if whether they correlate with nuclear tests and with nuclear bomb tests and with UFO events. And yes, he surprisingly finds correlation between my transients, this from before Sputnik, and the nuclear bomb tests and the UFO sightings.
What's the statistical probability that there is that correlation with?
I mean, it's very, very unlikely. I think it's what we would state as like 3 sigma events.
Oh, wow.
If I remember correctly, I have to double check the paper, but
sure, that's a very high degree
yes,
of probability, though.
It's a very low probability that it's gonna happen by chance. So these are real correlations. Of course, you cannot say if there's a causation there or not, but these are real, really unlikely things to happen by chance. But we still see these correlations. That's one of the things. But the equally interesting thing that now that is in the other preprint is that we have been seeing like multiple of these events, and I think I talked about the previous time that we see some of them, they're aligned along a narrow band or along a line. They have extremely like statistically unlikely alignments. Let's say one of them has a probability of 1 in 10,000 to be aligned along this band. And it looks like it's kind of could be caused by solar reflection on an artificial material, something very flat and something extremely reflective. And or that it's a formation is one of these two things that one can play with, two thoughts. And even more interestingly, what we didn't know when we found this candidate and when we posted it on archive the first time was that this date when it happened was on the 27th of July 1952, which is one of the most famous UFO mass sightings. And that's how, for example, Steve came up with the idea of let's check this. If it's true that these transients correlate with UFO events, we will see this correlation, and he finds it. He sees it in the data.
Let me interrupt you briefly for a moment, Beatrice, because there's a lot for our audience to take on here. So if there's a single flash that appears in the sky, that can often just be a glitch. It might be something in the plate, or it might be some issue that we can't explain. But if you have, as you've discovered, multiple point-like lights perfectly aligned and visible only in one long exposure photograph, that's what you're seeing. Is that correct?
That's what we are seeing in some cases. We have very beautiful like alignments between several of these objects. They look like stars. And the question is, what are those?
The type of reflection that you're talking about, I had to go and look this word up, is a specular reflection. Can you explain what a specular reflection is?
Well, think of mirrors. They are extremely reflective. It's not like if you have a stone and let's say if you have sunlight falling on a asteroid, it's going to, I mean, as it moves and tumbles, it's going to always be kind of, it's going to leave a beautiful streak. Now, if you have something that moves around and only sometimes the sunlight falls on the mirror, you have something very flat and extremely reflective, it can sometimes give off a flash. And for example, today, we have thousands of these flashes on the sky happening because of all the space debris that humans have created and all the satellites. Now, it's one thing to see that stuff today, and another thing to find that in pre-Sputnik plates. And here's the beautiful thing. So our referee gave a brilliant idea during the review and said, okay, so if you want to show that it's really is solar reflections, then show us like how it looks in the Earth's shadow. Because of course, if you look in the shadow of the Earth casts a shadow cone all the time. And if you look in the shadow of the Earth, in that place, in that shadow, you're not supposed to see many transients. Okay, so we checked, and guess what? We have a huge deficit of transients there. And that's where I started getting so-called a slight or minor shock, because
Okay,
it was
so
a really pronounced deficit.
now I just want to emphasize to our audience why this is significant. So these specular reflections that you're seeing, multiple dot point-like lights in straight lines, they're significant because they indicate something possibly technological,
Well, they are
something
not all in
structured.
straight lines. They are not those that we were checking. Now we were taking a sample of this. A lot of them are single transients, are just single flashes. And
But how could there possibly be something artificial, something constructed in orbit pre 1957? Because as we all know from our history, Beatrice, there was nothing in orbit from human civilization until Sputnik satellite was launched by the Soviets in 1957.
and apparently, whatever they are also somehow correlating in time with our nuclear bomb tests and with our UFO sightings. So what are we seeing? I don't think that's plate defects, unless plate defects are getting intelligent and are avoiding the shadow of the Earth on the photographic plates.
So,
So
so, so the
it's
simple
getting
fact is,
interesting.
why couldn't it be a plate defect?
Well, the plate defects, they are going to be anywhere on the plate, or I mean, even if they would be clustering on, let's say, on the edge or something, they're not going to deliberately avoid the shadow of the Earth that is
So
moving
the
on the
fact
plate.
that you've been able to definitively show that there's almost no transience when they're in the shadow of the Earth suggests that this is something artificial, specular reflection
Yes.
moving in geosynchronous orbit in a way that is obviously emitting a dot point like flash in lines, in aligned lines. All of this,
Sometimes
all
some
of
of them are
this,
in lines.
yeah, all of this suggests something technological. Are we talking here, Beatrice, about the possibility of a non-human technology that was surveilling this planet at that peak moment in UFO history?
I don't find any other way of looking at this data. I think, I mean, if I take the pieces together, that some of them fall on a line. Our best cases happen during the Washington, D.C. flap by coincidence. There's temporal correlations with the nuclear bomb tests and with UFO sightings. And on top of it, there's a huge deficit in the shadow of the Earth. For me, this looks technological. But
What's
I might be wrong. Maybe there's
the
a new physical phenomenon that that nobody knows about yet. But to me, it looks very high tech.
for me? I'm not a statistician, but I really sat up straight when I read the statistical likelihood that this is something that is ruled out by the Earth's shadow as being, perhaps a plate glitch or something like that. What have you learned statistically from testing whether these transients appeared in the Earth's shadow?
Well, I've learned that to have this deficit by chance is extremely low probability to happen by chance. I think it's bigger probability that one gets eaten up by a supermassive black hole tomorrow than that this happens by chance. That's how improbable it appears to be, if
Now,
the analysis is sound.
now we're going
So,
to get into the detail of individual transients in a moment. I'm going to talk about candidate 5, but let's just help our audience here. You can rule out meteors and stars and asteroids because they don't line up and appear simultaneously. True?
yes, true.
Plate defects, that also doesn't wash because they aren't evenly spaced, and we know that they disappear in the Earth's shadow. So, you know,
I think I would say like this: we should always, when we work with these transients, we should assume that you have a mixture of both. You're going to have some things are going to be plate defects, even if we don't want it to be that way, and some things are going to be real. Because if all would be plate defects, we would not see the correlations, the deficit, the things lining up, and if everything would be real, we would never have any doubts at any level. But we see a 30% of deficit in the more refined analysis. So maybe it's something like something between 50 or 70% of plate defects or something, but you still have a considerable amount that is real, a real effect. So I think it's easier to think about it like a mixed population of the transient catalogs that we are working with right now, because they are not visually vetted.
What shocks me, though, Beatrice, is if these were artificial technological objects in Earth orbit at that time in the 1950s, there was a hell of a lot of them, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think one could estimate that we are having maybe around 70,000 to 100,000 of these objects at any time in the early 50s, and maybe still today.
What are they doing there? I mean, ultimately, why geosynchronous orbit? Why would they be sitting in geosynchronous orbit? That means that they're essentially they've positioned themselves to correlate to a particular point on the planet. Is that correct?
Well, surveillance is, that orbit is good for surveillance, it's stable. It's if in case you want to see what's happened on the Earth, it's a good place.
Do we know what country they were positioned over? Are we able to do anything like that to show where they were positioned?
I haven't checked it. I guess there are ways of figuring it out that we can
Right. So
maybe.
just for this bear with a little brain, help me here. You've got two plates minimum, and you've been able to look at before and after. So the object is there in one plate and gone the next. That's what you call a transient, right?
Well, yes, but of course you're not interested in comparing plates that are 70 years in between. If you compare two plates that are 70 years in between, you will catch every asteroid that is flying through the field, and then you'll have many transients, but they're not interesting.
So what's the difference? What's the difference in time on average between the two plates that you were comparing?
30 minutes, and that's where it gets interesting. You need to really narrow it down and compare like multiple plates to see whether it's a effect of that you're comparing, let's say, plates of different sensitivity or plates that are differently long in exposure time, different depth, or how long they are apart.
This is where I literally fell off my chair when I was reading your paper. I got so excited because what you're saying is there are tens of thousands, 70 to possibly 200,000 objects in orbit that were transient. Some of them are actually aligned, and that's where you focus your attention. But let's not be diverted from the fact that you're talking about an enormous number of transient objects. Are they all showing this specular reflectivity, the suggestion of something technological, the suggestion of potentially something artificial?
I would say like since we have a 30% deficit in the shadow, I'm going to guess on that there is around a 30% of the vasco transients are reflective objects. That's what I'm going to guess.
So either way, you're talking here. I mean, Beatrice, this is technology. There was no technology, no human technology in space in the early 1950s. If it wasn't us, who was it?
Well, I do admit I've had a major ontological shock in the last weeks because I got a shock when I was looking through the results. I've been recalculating on and off, checking all kind of things. What could I have done something wrong? And I had stomach ache the first 3 days when I was just thinking about it. The first person I talked to was Dennis Åsberg, who did the video that went viral, and we both were sharing our ontological shock with each other. I have no idea what it is, but I'm pretty sure nobody expects it to be there. So I think people have been dismissing a lot of things that look like transients on the photographic plates and saying, oh, it's just plate defects. It's just plate defects. And while there might exist a lot of plate defects, I think a real signal has been hiding among the noise. And that is where is the challenge, to try to separate where is the signal, where is the noise, how do we do it correctly?
Now, I want you to explain to our audience the significance of this specular reflectivity with emphasis on figure 6 in your paper. In your paper, you did a whole series of simulated shapes, which are the kind of shapes that would emit the sort of reflections that you're talking about. And that's the point in your paper, after I'd got through all the statistical analysis, where I went, holy hell, you're talking about something constructed here, something,
yes, of course.
something technological. These are not objects that are naturally occurring.
No, I don't think that whatever we see is naturally occurring.
So you see conical objects, octagonal objects, semispherical objects, triangular objects, and
Well,
I don't know.
these are just examples of what could produce like glints along a line that not necessarily are having what's called regular spacing. These are just a few examples that were simulated by my colleague Hisham Guergouri in Algeria. So yeah, we are not thinking about natural objects. Of course, nature always can play a trick on us. Maybe someone will one day show us that all these are natural objects. But again, then I'm wondering, why do we see a correlation with nuclear bomb tests and with UFO sightings?
But basically, what you've done is you've simulated how various three-dimensional shapes could produce glinting patterns similar
Yes.
to those that you've observed. And is it fair to say you could not explain those specular reflections, those really shiny mirror-like surface reflections, with conventional space objects like space
No.
debris, or asteroids or meteors or something like that?
No, that's the thing, that these natural objects would be leaving a streak in a 15 minutes exposure, or they wouldn't move out of the image. But if there's something that moves out of the image that fast during half an hour, it will be streaking if it's a natural one, because it's going to have a round shape. It's not going to be super, super reflective. But what we see indicates something very flat, extremely reflective, and many of them. So that's what I think currently.
I mean, the interesting thing, just to remind people about the 1952 flyover, I think it was on the weekends of the 19th of July and the 27th of July, 1952. There were recorded by military pilots, civilian aviation air traffic controllers, civilians on the ground, military on the ground. Many, many thousands of witnesses witnessed anomalous objects, apparently craft of some kind, moving across Washington, D.C. They didn't land on the White House lawn, but they certainly showed behavior that was anomalous. High speeds, instantaneous maneuvers, all of those things that constitute what we call the 5 observables to suggest something anomalous. And there's a candidate you talk about that's also featured in one of your plates, Candidate 5. Talk me through
Yes.
Candidate 5.
So it is like 5 points on a narrow band, and the question is, are we seeing something glinting or are we seeing a formation? I can't tell from the image. And these 5 points happened on the 27th of July 1952, which is the second weekend of the Washington flap. Funnily enough, another candidate that we had, like the triple transient, we wrote a paper. It was before I ever heard about the Washington flap that these candidates were found. So Enrique wrote a paper about the triple transient. We published it in
The
MNRUS.
point being, you weren't setting out with a conformational bias. You reported the triple transient before you knew that it correlated with the Washington flyover.
And this one too. This candidate 5, this is like 1 year before I ever heard about Washington flap. We just reported what we saw. And then it's afterwards we realized, oh my God, like my friend David Altman told me about the Washington flap when he saw the triple transient and read the paper. And he pointed it out, and I went back and I looked at the first draft of this manuscript that is now in review, that we couldn't even get into review at that time. And I saw that our best candidate happened on the second weekend. So we had one of our top candidates came from each weekend. So that was just by coincidence. And that's where you start thinking, like, is it really a coincidence or not?
So at the very same time that us humans are reporting on radar and also with grade A1 human eyeballs, we're seeing objects on the ground or from the ground, we're seeing objects flying in the atmosphere across Washington, D.C. You're saying there were objects at geosynchronous orbit. So what's that, about 40,000 kilometers from Earth? They were positioned above a particular point on the planet, tracking that particular point, possibly for surveillance, as you speculate, but they were suggestive of something technological, something artificial.
Well, I'm saying that we are seeing mysterious transients that are very similar to all these other transients that appear to, where a significant fraction appear to come from specular reflections at geosynchronous orbits. Yes, it's a real possibility that that's what we are seeing, and I think that there are many more on these plates than what we were aware of when we first did our study.
Now, what really blew me away is I can remember from my very limited schoolboy and university statistics, the alignments that you're describing reached a 3.9 sigma statistical significance. What does that mean? Just explain that to our audience.
That it's an extremely unlikely alignment to happen by chance. So it's either we are seeing the specular reflections or we are seeing maybe a formation. Maybe it's a formation we are seeing there of lights. I don't know.
I mean, it
Which one?
really does raise the possibility, Beatrice, that at this moment in this period of history, 1952, July 1952, there was perhaps a massive fleet of objects, technological objects that weren't human, in geosynchronous orbit over our planet.
It's a possibility.
I mean, the significance of that is pretty awesome. You realize?
As I mentioned, I had problems with sleeping after for a few days. So, because it takes some time to melt it. When you first see it, you say, no, this can't be. Then you realize, oh my God, it probably is. And then I mean, it shakes your foundations
Sure.
to some degree.
I mean, the quality of the data you've got is quite impressive. So at geosynchronous altitude, 42,164 kilometers from Earth, only 0.33 of transients occurred inside Earth's shadow. So it does suggest something artificial.
I would say
Something.
so, yes. It suggests that something is artificial, and it suggests that we really need to take this topic really seriously because, look, there have been whistleblowers coming out, and they have been like David Grush, um, Luis Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Carnell. They are all highly credible, fantastically competent people that have been talking about this. And there are all these reports from the US military of UAP sightings. And all the time, we are finding new ways of dismissing both highly credible whistleblowers, the reports, and we always, like especially we scientists, we always find ways of ignoring those things, ignoring, making fun of the videos that we are getting. But seriously, this is a topic that needs to be checked. We have maybe ignored the most important topic for humans, and we need to do many tests. We need to check if what these objects are, not just discuss anymore is there something, because there certainly is something, but what are they, who are they, what
Now,
is our role here?
let's be very clear. You are not saying for sure that these are alien spacecraft.
I mean, what if what we see is some kind of probes from a past ancient civilization? I can't exclude that possibility. Maybe they aren't alien, maybe they are from here, but maybe there's just something very big that we don't know about the Earth or humanity.
You're suggesting there's the possibility that these might even be. I mean, I know I saw a recent exchange on Twitter between yourself and Patrick Jackson, who has this theory about these metallic spheres that have been seen all around the world by multiple witnesses, spheres that appear to be operating under their own propulsion with no visible means of propulsion. I mean, I know from your figure, your diagram, a straight sphere doesn't work. You almost have to have a flat surface on one or two ends of the sphere for it to do the kind of specular reflections that you're talking about. But what blows me away is whatever we're talking about here, we're talking about a technological object, a constructed artificial object.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And the other thing that just shocked me, Beatrice, is the statistical evidence. The result, when you looked at solar reflection as an explanation versus plate defects, this result had a 21.9 sigma significance level, meaning that the missing transients in Earth's shadow are not a statistical fluke. Supports the theory that sunlight is causing the reflections and
Yes.
completely undercuts the idea that plate defects might be the cause.
Yes.
I mean, a
I think because
21.9 sigma is enormously statistically significant, isn't it?
I think so, because I think if you look at any of the cases, you can always say, oh, maybe those are plate defects. You can always dismiss some of the cases that we have or so, but but statistically, when you look at it and you see it a big fraction missing in the shadow, then you know that this is not plate defects. This is something real.
Can I just get, for our audience's benefit, there might be some people here who may not understand why you believe these objects must be artificial because of these specular reflections. Can you explain, in a layperson's terms, why these reflections suggest something constructed, something technological or artificial?
So in order to get these kind of flashes that are brief, that you only see, let's say, very briefly, and that look like stars, and let's say a flash that appears and is like half second long or so, then you need something that is extremely flat and extremely reflective, like a mirror. Think about solar panels or glass, but something that reflects on that level and is super flat. And then you can get that kind of flash that looks like a star or looks like a transient in our plates. And you also need that object to be quite high up, let's say around 40,000 kilometers. A little bit lower sometimes also works, but if you look today at all these flashes, most of them come from the geosynchronous orbit. So now people can. The main question has been for a couple of years, like, are they real or are you actually seeing just plate defects? But plate defects, they will be anywhere on your photographic plate. And they have no reason to avoid the Earth's shadow. Because, of course, if you look in the Earth's shadow and you have something that is artificial, metallic and flat there, it's not going to reflect sunlight in the shadow. And that's why then you're not going to get the transients there. And what we are seeing is a deficit of transients in the Earth's shadow.
So you surmise that these are potentially techno-signatures. They are suggestive of a technology, something constructed, something artificial, something
Yes.
possibly alien.
Yes, I think it is.
It suggests that there are hundreds of thousands of unidentified glint-producing objects that may still be there in high orbit. We don't know if they're there or not, do we?
Well, something to think about is that today, like 70, or I don't remember the exact numbers, but roughly like 70% of all the objects that you do have at geosynchronous orbits are uncorrelated targets, which means that people don't know what it is. Like, it's something floats around there and people think it's some kind of human space trash, and it doesn't have a tag exactly to whom it belongs. There's a lot of objects at geosynchronous orbits, we don't know what they are. But of course, I don't know if these are the same objects or if it just happens to be at similar altitudes. It's also possible that our objects that we are seeing in the photographic plates are actually at higher altitude even.
Do you think it's a plausible explanation as a possibility? And I emphasize again, only as a possibility, because you're very careful not to state a certainty. It's a possibility that what we're talking about here is that the Earth was under surveillance at that time because of the extensive nuclear testing that was going on.
Well, we can speculate in that direction because we do see correlations with the atomic bomb test that within a day after we have a test, there's an increase both in the UFO reports and in the transients. So,
and what's the statistical strength of that evidence that there is that correlation with nuclear testing?
I think it was 3 sigma, but don't take my word for granted for it because I already forgot the exact numbers there. But it was there somewhere in that region.
Now, Beatrice, I know how strict peer review is, and this is a preprint paper at the moment, so basically it hasn't gone through the peer review process. How's it going? Have you had questions back on peer review yet?
Well, that's where from we got the brilliant idea with the Earth's shadow. I am not extremely optimistic about that any of the papers will pass through the peer review process, not because of the methods being lacking, but because there is so much of stigma in the astronomy community. But I still want to do my best. I still want to give a try. I still want to get the feedback. No matter what is the fate of the paper, I want the feedback from the experts.
What you've discovered is actually huge, though, because it means that there's been data all along that we've overlooked. Statistically significant data suggesting something was in geosynchronous orbit at a time of huge significance to this planet, when there were both UFO incidents and nuclear tests that correlate with those sightings.
It seems that way. If it's all correct, then that's how it looks to me.
It does. I mean, it's interesting. It's fascinating. It raises all sorts of possibilities because, one, we don't know if those objects are still there or not, because I guess, have you tried? Have you tried to look for those particular locations to see if there are still objects glinting at those particular locations?
There's no chance we are going to find it with only one image of the transient because it's 70 years in between. We only have one image. It's not that accurate, and you need to do a lot of predictions also. And what we do have now is the so-called ExoProbe project, but there the plan was actually to search in the Earth's shadow in order to look for active probes. But what happens if most of our interesting stuff is reflective? So we have to really rethink how our approach to this problem.
But if these objects are rotating, I mean, I'm just thinking scientifically for a moment, if they're rotating and they're emitting a glint, doesn't that mean that they wouldn't be holding a signal or a camera? Because if they're rotating, aren't most geosynchronous orbits locked in line so that whatever their sensors are, cameras or some kind of detector, is aligned with the Earth? Surely if they're rotating, they're losing the signal.
I have no idea how an alien probe would look. I can't even speculate about it. I don't even know if it's going to be moving in orbit even. I have no idea how such a probe even can function. The only thing I can say is that we see flashes of light reminiscent of technological objects in a time when there shouldn't be any, and at an altitude where you don't expect any even human experiments to have happened. And we see loads of them. So, and the rest I can only speculate about.
Are you expecting an aggressive debunk from the astronomical community?
Yes, I do. And it has to happen.
What do you think they will say?
Oh, I think they're going to probably go back to the old plate defects, etc., etc. But they will still have a problem with explaining the correlations that we have in time. They're also going to have a problem explaining the deficit in the Earth's shadow and the alignments. And that means that maybe even if a debunking happens, it doesn't mean anything is wrong. It only means that we'll need longer time for people to reassess the data, look at it again, treat it more fairly. This is just a normal process that happens at any time. in a society. It's a controversial result. We cannot expect people to not question it. They have to question it. They have to be aggressive, and it's a part of the process. And we will just hope that with time, people look at it again and give it a real fair trial with the data. And I'm sure that when they do, they will confirm what we are seeing.
One of the things I remember from our last conversation with you on Reality Check last year, you talked about how you discovered that astronomer Donald Menzel, who was a notorious debunker, had actually ordered the destruction of glass photographic plates at Harvard when they were doing their own sky survey. Did any of those glass photographic plates correlate with this period of time that we're talking about, where you've made this statistically significant observation?
I have no idea which plates that were destroyed, because he also destroyed a lot of logbooks. I haven't checked what was destroyed. I only know that Donald Menzel, he was debunking the Washington, D.C. 1952 flap, the one where we see our transients. And then 2 months after, he becomes director at Harvard, and as the first thing, he goes and destroys 1/3 of the sky survey. And then the next year, he stops the astronomers from continuing the sky survey. So for 15 years, they don't get any data. But it must be a coincidence again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just absorbing the magnitude of what you're talking about here, though, Beatrice, because there's no easy explanation to rule out the probability that this is something technological that was in Earth's orbit when humans did not have technological objects in orbit.
I would say so. I think it's going to be a challenge to do it on a statistical level.
What have you had any indications at all from anyone so far? I mean, obviously the plate defects is one possible explanation. Yeah. Is there? I mean, could it be that there are reflective asteroids in that part of geosynchronous orbit? Do we have asteroids sitting in that part of geosynchronous orbit?
Well, I am not aware of any such objects, natural objects, but who knows? Nature can always surprise us with something we never could expect. That's also a truth. Yeah. Maybe what I think is like 100% something technological. We will later find out that there's some type of extremely unusual natural object that just happened to gather there and we were unaware of it. One can never close eyes for these alternative possibilities. Although I find it easier to imagine that what we are seeing is something technological.
Forgive me here, I just don't understand yet. Why couldn't these be objects in Earth's atmosphere? How can we rule out the possibility that they were in the atmosphere?
It's because they're having so-called, I mean, they are point sources and they are not blurry. Because if we know, if they would have been in the atmosphere, given the size of the telescope, they would have been blurry sources, but these ones look like stars. And that's why we can say that they are very, very far away, or further than 100 kilometers away.
Because I think the exposures were, what, 45, 50, 60 seconds?
These are exposures of 50 minutes.
50 minutes? Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
So you would have got an enormous streak across the sky. Yep, I see what you mean. Wow. So where do you go from here? I mean, this is hugely important, very significant research. What's been the feedback so far from the astronomical community?
I haven't interacted too much with the astronomical community so far about it. I guess I will hear back more once we put the paper on archive on the preprint server. I haven't done it yet. We will see. So I talked to someone who was very telling me, like how terrible my life is going to be after that. I put this preprint servers. After I put this preprint for the public, so I got a prediction of the destruction of my life. But
yeah. Why would it? I mean, why should it? It's good science. I mean, all you're doing is putting up scientific explanation for something that occurred that was measured on photographic plates in the 1950s, and you're inviting science to give an alternative explanation to the conclusion that you've reached. I'm just going to read from page 17 of your document, and it was where I really just went, oh my goodness, this is so huge. The origin of the transients remains unknown. One plausible explanation is that they are caused by brief light emissions from artificial objects in orbit, or by objects with anomalous movements in Earth's atmosphere, emissions so brief that they appear as point sources rather than streaks, despite the telescope tracking the stars. Alternatively, they could arise from solar reflections off flat, highly reflective surfaces at geosynchronous altitudes. I mean, inside that fairly dense prose is an awesome probability. The possibility or probability that there were artificial technological objects in geosynchronous orbit at a period in human history when we weren't in orbit, that
Yeah,
someone else was there.
we are probably not alone.
Is that your strong view as you get more and more into this research?
I guess I would rather say we are never alone.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, it does appear. So there's really, because of the amount of junk that's up there now, and also I guess the uncertainties by just having one exposure that you can look at, you really can't go back and look in the history to see whether those objects are still there. Is there any way we could figure out whether there are such reflective transients still at geosynchronous orbit today?
I think what we're going to try to do is to use this old data to try to figure out what altitudes are most likely for these objects to reside at, or where do they appear to have resided in the 50s, and maybe go and try to find reflective objects at these altitudes today with our telescopes. That's what we'll try to do with the exoprobe, for example. If we find that there are many of them at 80,000 kilometers altitude, then we will try to find artificial objects at 80,000 kilometers altitude, simply try to work that way.
You're not saying for sure that these are alien spacecraft or alien probes of any kind, or perhaps the remnants of some pre-human civilization that had technology around this planet. You're not saying that for sure, are you?
No, of course, I can't ever say that for sure. I can only share my impression on the data in a given moment by what I know in the moment.
What can we or should we conclude about the possibility that these objects are technological or artificial at a time when humans weren't in space?
I guess it's up to everyone to decide for themselves what they want to conclude, but I guess that one thing one can conclude is that there seems to have been something that shouldn't be there in space in the 1950s that wasn't ours and isn't natural, and that there is something we really need to investigate.
What more investigations can you do, Beatrice? What would you like to see done now?
I think we need to really do efforts in searching for similar type of objects today, separated from all the human space trash. And also, let's say, if someone wants to go there with a big fishing net and take home 20,000 objects, maybe there's a chance that we catch something, one of them with us. That's one of the ways one can approach it.
I mean, how hard would it be to send a probe out there to actually just have a look?
Well, maybe that's a little bit of a cheaper mission than my fishing net expedition. I assume it's going to be kind of expensive to send a probe, but you also would probably need to send many probes. And then how do you figure out the pieces of metal that are ours from pieces of metal that are not ours? I don't know how to do that. This is still such a new finding for me. With these amounts of objects and transits that we see.
We know that some of the best space observation systems are operated by the great powers, the West and Russia, in their efforts to look for both ICBMs, and there's also space telescopes that look out towards space, towards outer space. Do we know if there's any data that we could obtain from any of those satellites or those platforms to see if we could have a look at geosynchronous orbit to see what's out there?
I assume that we would need to ask, even if we asked for the permission, the question would go through the three-letter agencies, and I suspect that given the controversy around UFOs that has existed in light of these new results, maybe I don't believe that we would get a fair reply from the three-letter agencies that just would give us green light. Hey, here you go.
Well, I
So,
mean, that begs the question, do you think countries like Russia and the US, which have space surveillance systems themselves,
yeah.
most of them classified, do you think they must know about what you've discovered?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they do. They might not be aware of the full extent, but I expect that they have been aware of it for a while. Maybe not as long as we imagined, because I imagine that maybe they didn't even have the radar capacities or anything like that in the 50s to know what was out there. And maybe once they got the capacities, maybe we already had sent enough many satellites into space to litter it down. So, but I suspect that they do have knowledge that we might not be fully aware of.
One of the reasons I'm really interested in your paper is because Australia has become a very important platform for the United States in surveilling for space debris. There's a space telescope out at Exmouth in northwest Cape of Australia, and there's an array that's been erected in South Australia to do similar observations, reportedly to look for space debris. I'm just wondering if the US and Russia are aware of whatever these objects are that you detected in geosynchronous orbit in the 1950s. Maybe they're still there, and maybe that's why they're taking an extra close interest in what's sitting in orbit just off our planet.
I can imagine. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be interested in all the uncorrelated targets at geosynchronous orbits and above. Or I imagine they have a lot of reasons for just, I mean, military interest. But maybe there is also, if they're aware of that there's so many weird objects, then they also need to keep track of them. I don't know. I don't know how it works with the military. I'm a civilian, so I can only guess.
Have you had any blowback at all to date, Beatrice? You say you're worried about blowback. You're worried about also the ontological shock. It's exciting, but are you copping any criticism behind the scenes at all at the moment? Are you fearful of a response?
Well, I would say like this, whatever is the criticism, I've had also support. So, like, of course, there are people who are critical that I'm openly talking. They want me to be much more careful in the way how I express myself in the media, in the way how I express myself on social media pages. But I have reached a state where I don't feel I'm sincere with myself if I too much wrap my words in sugar or sugarcoat it or too careful with how I phrase myself around these findings, because I believe that what we see is something real. I believe we see a real physical phenomenon that shows itself, like, let's say, like a deficit in the Earth's shadow with correlations with these nuclear bomb tests. And I'm not sure how I'm supposed to present these results in a way where I feel that I'm honest to myself and honest to the audience without offending others. Others will be offended probably by the way how I talk about these findings, and that's how it will be.
73 years ago, I think that would be, in Earth's orbit, before humans were in space, there were objects that you think are strongly suggestive that they were artificial, technological, and they correlated with important events on our planet, the explosion of nuclear weapons, the Washington 1952 flyover. These deserve explanation, don't they?
I think so. I think there's certainly something, and if we combine it with all these testimonies we'd have from really highly competent personnel from the Pentagon, yes, there seems to be something, and we need to take it seriously. Because we always talk about that science doesn't back up what the witnesses say. We always talk about that science doesn't back up what these whistleblowers are saying. But here I tell you, science backs it up. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Beatrice, I'm for one very excited by your research. I think it's a lot for our audience to get their brains around, but the simple fact is all the audience needs to know is you've presented compelling evidence suggestive that there potentially was a technology of some kind, constructed artificial objects in geosynchronous Earth orbit in the early 1950s, before
Yes.
humans entered space.
Exactly. That's what the paper is about, the two papers. So
That's, by any measure, a momentous discovery, and I'm looking forward to hearing how the debunkers respond. Dr. Beatriz Villarroel, congratulations on a great bit of research to you and your team, and I think we sincerely hope that you continue your research, and good luck for the future.
thank you. Thanks. And thanks a lot for inviting me and letting me talk about it.
No problem at all.